I want to welcome you to Ethical Hacking Essentials. We have a lot of very interesting items to cover, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And so let me just introduce myself to you. My name is Kevin King, and I have been working in the IT field for quite a long time, from Fortune 500 companies to even smaller ones. And I've had the opportunity to work with network cybersecurity on many different levels. And I'll tell you what, it's fun. So if you are interested in ethical hacking, then it's the place to be. This world needs people who know what's going on with hacking, with protocols, with computer systems. So we need you. So I'm glad you are here. And as a student of this class, you may have expectations, and I want you to know that some of the things that we want to do here, number one is I want to help you understand the essentials of ethical hacking. And number two, I want you to be able to do some ethical hacking in the labs. And so that's very important to me also. And I want you to walk away feeling like you have a good start into ethical hacking. So let's get started here. And the first thing I want to talk about is what is the Ethical Hacking Essentials program. Well, it is a security program. We look at fundamental concepts in this program. We look at information security. We look at ethical hacking. And so it equips you as a student in this class with the skills that you're going to need to be able to identify the increasing information security threats that you'll see around you. There are so many threats that are growing around the world, and look at security posture of your organization. And also not just identify, but implement. That means doing, right? That means that you're going to use the skills that you get from the hands-on exercises in iLabs and CyberQ and actually know how to do a lot of these items. So what do we have for you? Well, first of all, we have this introduction that we're talking about here. And then after that, we go into some fundamentals of information security. We look at some fundamentals of ethical hacking. We're going to look at information security threats. We're going to look at how do you assess the vulnerability of an application, of a port or whatever. We're going to look at password cracking techniques. And wait a minute, not just techniques, but some countermeasures. So if you look at the all except for the last module, we don't just look at techniques, but we look at countermeasures. Yes, you want to be an ethical hacker. I think it's a great thing to do, but you want to be able to use those skills also to protect yourself and the organizations that you are working with. So cracking techniques, countermeasures, social engineering techniques, countermeasures, network level attacks, countermeasures, web application attacks, and countermeasures, wireless attacks, and countermeasures. Same with mobile, IoT, and OT attacks. And lastly, before we go into Mod 12, we have cloud computing threats. And guess what? That's right, countermeasures. And then we're going to spend some time talking about pen testing. With pen testing, this is where you take all your skills as an ethical hacker and you're hired by an organization, or as an employee of an organization, you're asked to try to crack into, break into, penetrate this organization, this application, and then come up with a really good report that shows us what's wrong. Anyway, we'll get into it when we get to Module 12. Let's just move on and talk about some other stuff you'll learn. Like for instance, if you go down here, and when we get to network level attacks, we'll talk about sniffing, talk about session hijacking, denial of service. When we get to application, we'll talk about web server attacks, web application attacks. We'll talk about SQL injection. When we get into mobile platform, we'll even talk a little bit about mobile platform management, security guidelines and tools. When we get into IoT and OT, we'll talk about the concepts. A lot of people have never heard of OT, and they have a vague idea of IoT. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about cloud computing technologies. We'll talk about cloud computing threats. We'll talk about attacks. And guess what? Security techniques. And and then some of the fundamentals of pen testing like I talked about before for that last module. Probably the one of, and it's super important, I was going to say probably the most important, but you really need both, is this lab environment where you're going to be able to have access to Windows workstations and servers, Parrot Linux security for your hacking, Android and Ubuntu. And what we're going to need to do is make sure that you don't just listen to and participate in these lectures, but at the end of each lecture, or maybe even during the lecture, you pause it and you work on the labs, because that's where you're going to get the hands-on muscle memory, tools, etc., that you need to be a good ethical hacker. All right, so welcome to the class. We're going to look at the essentials of ethical hacking. It's great to have you. Glad you signed up. And let's get started.